I don't see how anyone could look at my life before my wife and say that now.
Alaskan Bush People gave viewers a front-row seat to the rugged, untamed lives of the Brown family as they tackled the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. Each member pulled their weight to keep their off-the-grid homestead thriving. From brutal winters to run-ins with wildlife, they faced it all. But no one expected the tragedy that would rock their family to the core and spell the end of their journey on the show. What happened to shatter this wild legacy? Let's dig into the heartbreaking event that changed everything. Everything about living off the land, the Brown family of Alaskan Bush People was known for their unique, self-sufficient lifestyle rooted deeply in the wilderness of Alaska long before their story reached reality television. Living in isolation, far from the conveniences of modern society, they adapted to the harsh Alaskan terrain, finding ways to survive with limited resources. They never expected a massive reality TV show that people all over the world would love, nor did they anticipate that a massive tragedy would cause its ending. Before the show began, the Browns, headed by Billy and Ami Brown, chose to live a life closer to nature, more connected to the land and away from what most people consider ordinary comforts. Billy, originally from Texas, was drawn to the raw, untamed aspects of Alaska. He wanted his family to live a simpler life, relying on each other and the land, which meant giving up the conveniences that most families rely on. Ami, his wife, supported this vision, and together they moved further and further into Alaska's wilderness, eventually finding a remote area to call home. Building a shelter in the Alaskan wilderness wasn't easy, especially given the extreme weather conditions. Winters were brutal, with temperatures dropping well below freezing. Knowing this, the family constructed their own cabins using the resources around them. With wood from the surrounding forests, they built log shelters, often by hand. Each shelter had to be durable enough to withstand strong winds, heavy snow, and rain. To keep these cabins warm, the family often relied on wood-burning stoves, using logs they had chopped themselves. This required a significant amount of work since chopping and gathering wood was a daily task. As temperatures dropped, keeping enough wood for heat became a priority. Each family member was involved in this process, learning how to handle an axe and cut wood safely. One of the primary ways the Browns sustained themselves was through hunting. They would hunt for large game, including deer and moose, animals that provided food that could last for months if preserved correctly. The meat from a single animal would be carefully rationed and preserved by drying or smoking to ensure it would last through the winter months when food was scarcer. Every hunt was a group effort, requiring patience, knowledge of the landscape, and an understanding of animal behavior. Fishing was another essential part of their diet. Alaskan rivers and coastal areas provided a natural supply of fish, particularly salmon, which could be smoked or salted to last longer. Fishing wasn't just about catching enough for a meal, it was about catching enough to store for later. The Browns became skilled at preserving fish, creating makeshift smokehouses to dry and cure their catch, and learning how to keep their food safe from wild animals like bears. Foraging was a daily activity, especially during the warmer months. The Browns learned to identify edible plants, berries, and mushrooms that grew in the wild. This knowledge was crucial since it allowed them to add variety to their diet. They knew which berries were safe to eat and which to avoid, as well as which plants had medicinal properties that could be used if someone got sick. Living in the Alaskan wilderness required a reliable water source, and this was a significant concern for the Browns. They often lived near streams, rivers, or natural springs to have easy access to fresh water. However, drinking directly from these sources wasn't always safe. The family developed ways to purify their water using techniques like boiling or filtering it with rocks, sand, and charcoal. During colder months, finding water became even more challenging. Streams could freeze over, making it difficult to collect water. When this happened, they would melt snow or ice, taking the time to ensure they had enough water not only to drink but also to cook and wash. Collecting and storing enough water was an ongoing task that required constant attention, particularly in winter. Clothing was another crucial aspect of their survival strategy. The Browns had to be prepared for Alaska's extreme weather conditions, which often meant creating or adapting their own clothing. They learned how to layer effectively, using fur and other natural materials for insulation. They would often reuse and repurpose clothing items, stitching together materials to create coats, gloves, and hats. Over time, they developed practical methods to ensure everyone had appropriate gear. Living off the land required everyone's involvement, and each family member played a role in the survival of the group. Children were taught survival skills from a young age: how to chop wood, identify edible plants, hunt, and fish. The family also had to be flexible and resourceful. If something broke, they fixed it themselves, often using whatever materials were available. Necessity pushed them to learn how to make their own repairs, whether it was fixing a cabin roof or mending a fishing net. Self-reliance wasn't just a lifestyle, it was a necessity for survival. Living far from any towns or hospitals meant that the family couldn't rely on medical assistance if someone got sick or injured. They had to know basic first aid and find natural remedies in their surroundings. Certain plants they foraged were used for medicinal purposes, helping to relieve minor ailments. In case of more serious injuries, their only option was to travel to the nearest town, which could be hours or even days away. This distance made the family more cautious, as a severe injury could mean a life-threatening situation. Though they lived far from populated areas, the Browns occasionally interacted with other Alaskan settlers or townsfolk. These connections were minimal but could sometimes be helpful in acquiring resources or learning new skills. In some cases, they might trade with other locals for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. For years, they lived in relative isolation, developing a lifestyle of self-reliance that few could match. Then came the turning point that would shift their lives in an entirely new direction. When the Discovery Channel approached the Browns with a proposition to document their lifestyle for television, it marked the beginning of an incredible transition for the family, from an isolated life in the wild to one of unexpected fame. Discovery Channel producers were intrigued by the family's extreme way of life. They were searching for authentic stories about people who were managing to survive entirely off the land in harsh environments. The Brown story struck a chord, as parents Billy and Ami had chosen a lifestyle far removed from mainstream society, and their 7 children were raised to understand and thrive in these challenging conditions. When Discovery first reached out, the Browns were hesitant. While they lived in the wilderness to escape modern society, they also knew that sharing their way of life could be an opportunity to make a better living while staying true to their roots. Eventually, they agreed to let cameras into their world. In 2014, Alaskan Bush People debuted, capturing the Brown family's journey of surviving the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness, their day-to-day struggles, and their way of life. Each member of the Brown family contributed something unique to their story, and viewers quickly became fascinated by their resilience, sense of adventure, and the deep bond they shared. At its heart, the show was about family and the unique culture they had built in the middle of nowhere. As the show began, Billy, the father and patriarch of the family, took on a central role. A natural storyteller, Billy conveyed the family's lifestyle to viewers with a deep sense of purpose. He was driven by a vision to live freely in nature, independent of modern society. Billy often shared his philosophies on self-sufficiency and instilled these values in each of his children. His experience and knowledge helped guide the family through each season, particularly during challenging times. Ami, the matriarch, played a quieter but equally essential role. She was the family's cornerstone, always providing support and a nurturing presence. Ami handled many of the family's needs, from cooking to managing their health. She had always been in the background, ensuring everything ran smoothly while her children grew up learning how to survive and make the most of what they had. As Alaskan Bush People continued, the family faced new pressures and challenges. Living in front of cameras brought an element of visibility they hadn't expected. Experienced before, some family members adjusted more easily, while others struggled with the exposure and its effects. Still, they managed to adapt, and as they did, their life in the Alaskan bush became even more interesting to viewers. The family continued to build shelters, hunt, fish, and survive in the wilderness. Over time, the show's storylines evolved. The family faced both natural and personal hardships, from injuries to health problems. Amy's battle with cancer was particularly challenging for the family and marked a serious moment in the show. As the seasons passed, Alaskan Bush People showed how the family continued to adapt and change. They faced evolving challenges, including occasional conflicts with authorities about land use. Over time, the Browns' life shifted. They explored new areas in the lower 48 states, particularly after Amy's health made it harder for them to live in the remote Alaskan bush. The family relocated to Washington state, where they continued their off-grid lifestyle, adjusting their routines and habits to the new landscape. But they didn't know that a massive tragedy would cause the show to end. And no, I'm not talking about the huge fire that destroyed their homestead. A massive fire destroyed their homestead. Like many families living in remote areas, they faced the relentless challenges of nature, which culminated in a dramatic wildfire that changed everything for them. The 2020 season finale, with a wildfire, became a pivotal moment in their lives, marking the end of their life at the homestead and forcing them to return to Alaska. For the Browns, living in the wilderness was not just a choice but a lifestyle deeply rooted in their identity. They had spent years building their homestead in Washington. The family's dedication to self-sufficiency and their connection to the land had always been a source of pride. However, as summer turned to fall in 2020, the threat of wildfire loomed over many parts of the western United States, including their homestead. As the summer progressed, the family noticed changes in the environment. The temperatures were rising, and the area experienced a severe drought, drying out the forest and increasing the risk of wildfires. The Browns were no strangers to fire hazards. They had learned the hard way about the dangers of the wilderness. Nevertheless, the reality of a wildfire was different from the theoretical dangers they had been prepared for in the past. They could sense that something serious was brewing, but they held on to hope that they would be spared from disaster. The fire started with little warning. One evening, the family was alerted by neighbors that a blaze had ignited nearby. Initially, it seemed manageable, but with the high winds and dry conditions, the flames quickly spread. What began as a small fire turned into a raging inferno that engulfed everything in its path. The Browns, with their deep-rooted knowledge of the land, sprang into action. They worked tirelessly, trying to protect their home and belongings. They packed what they could and attempted to create fire breaks around their property, hoping to minimize the damage. As the fire approached, the family faced the heartbreaking realization that their years of hard work and dedication could be lost in a matter of moments. They had built their lives around their homestead, creating a place that felt like home, and now it was at risk of being destroyed. The atmosphere was tense as they fought against the elements, working as a unit to protect their sanctuary. For an entire week, the fire raged on, threatening their home and everything they held dear. The family endured long days filled with smoke and ash, struggling against fatigue and fear. They watched as the flames consumed the surrounding forest, hearing the crackling of trees falling and the relentless roar of the wildfire. The reality of the situation settled heavily on their shoulders. They were in a battle against nature that seemed impossible to win. Despite their efforts, it became clear that they could not hold back the fire. As the days passed, the flames encroached upon their property, and the family was forced to evacuate. They left behind their homestead, a place filled with memories, dreams, and aspirations. It was a goodbye to a life they had fought so hard to create. But they didn't know that a couple of years later, a much larger tragedy would cause the ending of their show. Once the fire was finally contained, the extent of the damage became clear. The Browns returned to their property only to find their shelter reduced to ashes. Everything they had built, years of labor and love, was gone. The devastation was overwhelming. In the aftermath of the fire, the family faced a new reality. They had to reassess their situation, and after much deliberation, they made the difficult decision to relocate back to Alaska. The return was bittersweet. While they were heading back to familiar territory, it also meant leaving behind what they had worked for in Washington. The decision to leave the homestead was not taken lightly, but the Browns knew that safety and survival came first. Returning to Alaska presented new challenges and opportunities. The family had to reestablish themselves in an area they knew well but had been away from for some time. The transition was not easy, as they had to adapt to a new phase of their lives. In Alaska, they began to rebuild. The Brown family approached this new chapter with the same determination they had always shown. They sought out land where they could once again create a homestead, tapping into their survival skills honed over the years. As they settled back into life in Alaska, the Browns focused on healing and moving forward. They worked together to gather supplies, build shelters, and adapt to their old and new surroundings. As with many family drama shows, behind the scenes, the family dynamics had been tumultuous, especially after the tragedy that caused the ending of Alaskan Bush People. The sudden, unexpected, tragic death of patriarch Billy Brown marked a significant shift for the family. It started exposing deep-seated issues that had been simmering beneath the surface and made hairline fractures in the family open. One of the most publicized exits from the family was that of Matt Brown, the eldest son. Matt's relationship with the family had always been complicated. He struggled with substance abuse and was often candid about his challenges, including his time on the show. After his departure from Alaskan Bush People, he made shocking allegations, claiming that the show's producers and even his parents had introduced him to cocaine. Matt expressed feelings of being isolated from the family, stating he hadn't felt part of it for a long time. Bam Brown had been relatively quiet until a tragic incident thrust him back into the public eye. He was involved in a car crash that resulted in fatalities. Although Bam was not at fault for the accident, he was left grappling with the aftermath. In the midst of the family turmoil, nobody expected Noah Brown to make headlines as well. After his father's death, he was so devastated that he decided to move away from the family's mountain home, joining a few of his siblings who had also chosen to leave. Unlike Matt, Noah clarified that his move wasn't about family drama. Instead, it stemmed from the hardships they had endured following the Palmer Mountain wildfire, which had devastated their property and resulted in the loss of nearly all their possessions. The loss of Billy Brown was a turning point that reverberated throughout the family. Billy had been the backbone of the Brown family, guiding them through challenges and teaching them survival skills in the wilderness. His death not only left a void in the family's dynamics but also exposed vulnerabilities that many were unaware of. With the family grappling with loss and personal struggles, tensions began to surface. The stress of navigating grief, public scrutiny, and individual issues created rifts among the siblings. Although many thought that their family bond was unbreakable, one tragedy started an avalanche and caused the ending of Alaskan Bush People. What do you like the most about Alaskan Bush People? Let us know in the comments.